I let a repairman into my daughter's house while she was overseas for work. 20 minutes after he went inside, my phone buzzed with a text. No words, just a photo. I pulled over on the side of Route 522 and stared at my screen. My hands started shaking before my brain even finished processing what I was looking at. I turned the car around. Before I get into what happened next, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. I read every single one. My name is Walter Greer. I'm 67 years old and I live in Kenmore, Washington, about 20 miles north of Seattle. I spent 32 years as a family court judge in King County before I took early retirement at 63. 32 years of sitting on that bench, reviewing case after case involving children who were hurt, hidden, neglected, exploited by the very people who were supposed to protect them. You'd think that kind of work would harden a person. It does the opposite. It makes you see the world through a different lens. You start noticing things other people miss. The way a child sits too still when an adult raises their voice. The way a kid finishes every scrap on their plate like they don't know when the next meal is coming. The way they flinch at a door closing too loud. I noticed those things in courtrooms for 3 decades. I never thought I'd need to notice them in my own family. My daughter Claire is 38 years old. She's a structural engineer, works for an infrastructure consulting firm, sharp as anyone I've ever met. She got her brains from her mother, God rest her soul. Claire has a son, Eli, from her first marriage. He's 8 now. His father, a man named David Park, died in a car accident 4 years ago. David was a good man, quiet, steady, the kind of person who remembered every birthday and showed up early to every school play. When he died, there was a life insurance policy that left a modest but meaningful amount for Eli's care, held in a custodial account until he turns 21. Claire manages it for him. 18 months ago, Claire married Marcus Tolland. He's 41, works in commercial real estate, has the kind of confidence that fills a room whether you want it to or not. The first time I met him, he shook my hand too hard and called me Walt. I've never gone by Walt in my life. I told him that politely. He smiled and said, "Sure thing, Walt. I should have paid more attention to that." I didn't dislike Marcus in the beginning. He was attentive to Claire, seemed stable financially, and Eli appeared comfortable around him. Children are honest barometers. They can't fake comfort. But children can also be trained to perform it, and I learned that distinction too late. The calls from Claire started coming less frequently after the wedding. That's normal, I told myself. She has a new life, a busy schedule. I gave her space. But the calls didn't just slow down. They changed in quality. She sounded careful when we talked, choosing words with a deliberateness that hadn't been there before. When I'd ask about Eli, she'd say he was fine, school was fine, everything was fine. Fine. That word started to bother me. About 6 months ago, I stopped by their house in Shoreline unannounced. I know you're not supposed to do that. I brought homemade chili because I had too much of it, and Claire loves it. Marcus answered the door. He looked at me the way people look at a bill they weren't expecting. Claire wasn't home, he said. She was at a work dinner. Eli was asleep, he said. It was 7:30 on a Saturday evening. I left the chili and drove home. 3 weeks ago, Claire got a call from her firm, a bridge rehabilitation project in Auckland, New Zealand. 8 weeks on the ground. It was the kind of opportunity she'd been working toward for years. She called me, excited, and then quieter when she mentioned that Eli would stay home with Marcus. He has school, Dad, she said. I can't uproot him for 2 months. Marcus said he'd handle it. I said all the right things. I told her I was proud of her. I told her to go do the work she was born to do. But after I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the window above the sink, watching the leaves on the maple tree move in the wind. I called Claire 2 days before she left and asked if I could have a spare key to the house. Just in case, I said. In case what? She asked. In case of anything, I said. An emergency. A burst pipe. She paused, and I could hear Marcus saying something in the background. And then she said, Sure, Dad. She left it under the mat for me the morning she flew out. The first week went fine. Marcus texted me twice, both times with a photo of Eli at the kitchen table with what appeared to be homework. Everything good, the text said. Thanks for checking. The second week, I texted him twice and got nothing back. On the first day of the third week, I called. Straight to voicemail. I texted. Nothing. I called the house line, which nobody uses anymore, but I had the number. It rang 8 times and went to a generic voicemail box that had never been set up. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Marcus traveled for work. Maybe he'd taken Eli somewhere for the weekend. Maybe his phone was broken. I ran through the list of reasonable explanations while I drove to Home Depot to pick up a new shower head, and by the time I got back to my car with the shower head in a bag, I had decided that none of the reasonable explanations were sitting right with me. I called Terry Okafor. Terry is a plumber I've used for 15 years. Good man, honest work, the kind of person who shows up when he says he will. I asked him if he could stop by my daughter's place in Shoreline the next morning to check on a pipe I was concerned about near the foundation. I was not concerned about any pipe, but I needed eyes inside that house, and I needed a reason to send someone in that Marcus couldn't object to. Terry said he could be there at 9. I gave him the address, told him the spare key was under the mat, and asked him to text me when he got inside so I knew he found the place. The next morning, I was driving back from the farmer's market on 522 when my phone buzzed on the seat beside me. I picked it up at a red light. It wasn't a text. It was a photo. I don't want to describe it in full detail. I'll say this. It was a small bedroom, a child's bedroom, and the door had a padlock on it. From the outside, I pulled over. My hands were on the steering wheel, and I couldn't make them let go for a moment. 32 years in family court, 32 years of photos submitted as evidence, of documentation, of case files thick as phone books describing what people do to children behind closed doors. I had seen this. I had seen versions of this hundreds of times, and now I was looking at it in a photograph of my grandson's bedroom door. I called Terry. He answered on the first ring, his voice low. Mr. Greer, I don't want to alarm you, but there's something going on here that I think you need to come see yourself. Is there a child in that room? A pause. Yes, sir. I haven't opened it. I didn't want to do anything until I talked to you, but I can hear him in there. He's awake. He knows I'm here. He asked if I was his dad. I'm on my way. Don't leave. Don't let anyone in. I'll be there in 11 minutes. I made it in 9. Terry was standing in the front hallway when I came through the door with my spare key, a big man looking genuinely rattled, which is not an easy thing to do to someone who's been crawling under houses for 30 years. He pointed me down the hall without saying a word. The padlock on Eli's door was a simple combination lock, the kind you'd put on a school locker. Not sophisticated. Not meant to keep someone out. Meant to keep someone in. I stood there and looked at it for a moment, feeling something move through me that I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hot anger, the other kind, the kind that is very quiet and very clear about what it intends to do. I don't know the combination, I told Terry. He handed me his bolt cutters without a word. The lock gave on the second try. I pushed the door open slowly. Eli was sitting on his bed with his back against the wall and his knees pulled up to his chest. He was in the same clothes I'd last seen him in, a blue Washington Husky sweatshirt and jeans. His hair was unwashed. There were 2 empty granola bar wrappers on the floor next to the bed, and a plastic cup with about 2 inches of water left in it. On his dresser was a small battery-powered lamp, the kind you'd take camping. He looked at me with his father's eyes. Grandpa? The word came out like a question and a relief at the same time, like he'd been hoping for something for days and wasn't sure he was allowed to. I crossed the room and crouched down next to the bed. I'm here, buddy. I've got you. His chin started going. He was trying very hard not to cry, the way kids do when they've been scared for long enough that crying starts to feel pointless. He said, Marcus locked the door. He said I had to stay in here until he got back. He said if I made any noise, the neighbors would call someone and I'd have to go to a place for kids that didn't have parents. I put my hand on his shoulder. That's not true. None of that is true. When did Marcus leave? Eli thought about it. 4 days ago, maybe 5. He left food, but I ran out. I heard Terry clear his throat from the doorway. He was on his phone, already calling someone. Let's get you something to eat, I said. Can you stand up? He could, but he moved carefully, like his legs had been folded for too long. I carried him to the kitchen. He was lighter than he should have been. I found bread and peanut butter and a jar of applesauce, and I sat him at the table and made him a sandwich and opened the applesauce and put a glass of orange juice next to it and watched him eat while I called 911. The operator was calm and efficient. I gave her the address and told her I was a retired family court judge who had found a minor child locked alone in his bedroom without adequate food or water for a minimum of 4 days. I told her I needed police and child protective services. I told her the child's stepfather was not present and his whereabouts were unknown. She said units were on their way. I sat across the table from Eli and watched him work through the sandwich and half the jar of applesauce. I kept my voice steady. I asked him about his teacher, about his best friend at school, about what video games he'd been wanting. He answered between bites, slowly loosening up. At one point he looked up at me and said, "Marcus said you were too busy for us." I said, "Marcus was wrong about that." Officer Diana Walsh arrived first. She was thorough, took in the room in one sweep, asked me for my ID and my relationship to the child, verified the spare key situation, took photos of the bedroom door and the cut padlock. The CPS caseworker who arrived 20 minutes later was a man named Greg Ellison. I didn't know Greg personally, but I knew 3 people who'd worked with him, and all of them had said the same thing. Solid, careful, doesn't miss much. He and I stepped into the hallway while Officer Walsh stayed with Eli. Greg looked at me for a moment. "You're Walter Greer." "I am. Judge Greer. I used to work King County Family Court. I testified in front of you twice." "I remember you," I said. He nodded once, the kind of nod that means we both understand what this is and neither of us needs to perform surprise. He opened his tablet. "Walk me through everything." I did. From the missed text to Terry's photo to the bolt cutters to the granola bar wrappers. Greg took notes without interrupting. When I finished, he asked one question. "Where's the mother?" "Auckland. I have her number. I'll call her after we finish here." He nodded again. "We're opening a formal investigation immediately. Given the duration of the abandonment and the child's condition, I'll be recommending emergency placement. Is that something you'd be pursuing?" Before he finished the sentence, I said yes. Eli went to the hospital. He was dehydrated, underweight by about 6 pounds for his age, and showing what the pediatric nurse described as heightened startle response and anxiety consistent with prolonged stress. No physical abuse. I sat with him in the examination room while they ran their tests, answering his questions in the calmest voice I had. At one point he asked, "Is Mom coming home?" I called Claire from the hospital parking lot at 11 that night. It was midday in Auckland. She picked up on the second ring, already smiling when she said hello, and I knew from the way her voice dropped when she heard my tone that she understood immediately that something was wrong. I told her everything. I told her about the padlock. I told her about the granola bars and the camping lamp. I told her about 4 or 5 days. We weren't sure which. I told her the hospital had him and that he was going to be okay. She was silent for so long that I said her name twice. Then she said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." "Dad, I swear to you I didn't know." "I know, Claire. I believe you. But I need you to listen to me very carefully right now." She listened. I told her not to call Marcus. Not yet. I told her that anything she said to him before he spoke to police could be used to complicate the investigation. I told her that her son was safe, that I was handling the legal end, and that the most important thing she could do right now was get on a plane. She was home in 22 hours. I did not sleep that night. I sat at Eli's bedside in that hospital room with the dim overnight lighting and the sound of the monitoring equipment, and I thought about every case I'd ever ruled on where a step-parent had done something that couldn't be undone. I thought about the ones where grandparents had been too slow to act, where the system had been too slow to act, where the outcome had been different. I thought about David Park, who had driven a structural engineer named Claire Greer home in the rain after a work event, who had remembered she liked Thai food on their 3rd date, who had sat in the front row at Eli's preschool graduation with a paper in his pocket that he'd been practicing since the night before. David, who would never know that his son had been locked in a room. That cold, clear feeling in my chest sharpened into something precise and purposeful. I knew how this system worked. I had been this system for 32 years. The next morning I called Patricia Shu. Patty had been a family law attorney in Seattle for 26 years. I had ruled on her cases more times than I could count. She was methodical, relentless, and deeply difficult to rattle in a courtroom. She was also someone who had watched me overturn a step-parent's rights 3 separate times based on evidence she'd helped build. She answered on the first ring. "Walter, Patricia, I need your help with something personal." She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "When can you come in?" We met in her office in the Rainier Tower at 10 that morning. I brought the photos Terry had texted me, the timeline I'd written out longhand the night before, and the name Marcus Tolland written at the top of a legal pad. Patricia listened, made notes, asked sharp questions. How long had the marriage been going on? When did contact with me decrease? Had there been any previous incidents involving Eli? Then she asked the question that mattered most. The life insurance policy for the boy. Who manages it? Clear. But Marcus is on the account as a secondary authorized user. She added him after the wedding. Patricia's pen stopped moving. I said, "I need you to request full financial records from that account for the past 18 months. She looked at me. "You already know what we're going to find." I said, "I have a very strong suspicion." The records came back 4 days later. In the 18 months since Marcus had been added to Eli's custodial account, there had been 19 withdrawals totaling just over $31,000. The stated purpose on 12 of them was listed as child care and educational expenses. The actual transactions, once Patricia's forensic accountant traced them, told a different story. A lease payment on a BMW 5 Series, 3 international flights, a hotel in Scottsdale that averaged $800 a night, 2 months of dues at a private golf club in Bellevue, $31,000 from a dead man's life insurance for his son, spent on a golf membership. I let myself feel that for exactly the time it takes to exhale. Then I put it in a folder. Marcus had been located by then. He'd been staying at the Westin downtown, which under different circumstances might have struck me as darkly funny. He'd retained a defense attorney named Bradley Ells, someone I knew by reputation, aggressive and slippery in equal measure. His position, as conveyed through Ells, was that the situation had been mischaracterized, that he had arranged for a neighbor to check on Eli, that the lock on the door was for Eli's safety and had been explained to the boy, that the withdrawals from the account were for legitimate expenses related to Eli's care and upbringing. Patricia and I went over each of these claims in her office with the patience of people who have spent their careers watching people lie under oath. The neighbor Marcus claimed he'd arranged unreachable. Her phone was disconnected. Greg Ellison found no evidence she existed at the address Marcus provided. The lock for Eli's safety. Eli had told the CPS investigator that Marcus put it on 2 weeks before leaving and practiced closing it in front of him. He told Eli the reason was so intruders couldn't get in. He told Eli the reason, a different day, was so Eli couldn't wander at night. He told Eli a third reason that Eli couldn't fully articulate, but that made him feel, in his words, like I was in trouble. The legitimate expenses. Patricia put them in a column next to what they actually were, and that column went in front of a judge. The preliminary hearing was 3 weeks after we filed. The charges included child endangerment, criminal abandonment of a minor, and financial exploitation of a minor's protected account. Judge Annette Cruz, who had joined the bench 2 years after I retired, and whose confirmation I had quietly supported, reviewed the petition for emergency termination of parental rights, with the expression of someone who has seen enough in this courtroom to not be surprised, and who is nevertheless very clearly not pleased. Marcus sat at the defense table looking like a man who had not fully understood, until this moment, who he had married into. Bradley Ells argued that the situation was being dramatized. He used the word dramatized 3 times. He suggested that my involvement represented an overreach by a former judge who had a personal vendetta against his client. He suggested that the financial records were being misinterpreted. Patricia presented the bank statements, the hotel receipts, the golf club membership, and 3 signed declarations from Eli's teachers documenting a 12-pound weight loss over 6 months, increasing reports of fatigue, and 2 occasions on which Eli had come to school without lunch and told his teacher he hadn't eaten breakfast either. I sat in the gallery and watched Marcus's attorney try to construct an alternative narrative out of materials that no longer held the shape of one. Judge Cruz ruled the same afternoon. Emergency termination of parental rights. Full custody transferred to Claire. A criminal referral forwarded to the King County Prosecutor's Office for the abandonment and financial exploitation charges. A restraining order prohibiting Marcus Tolland from coming within 500 feet of Eli Park Greer. He was arrested in the parking garage of the Westin 3 days later. The prosecutor charged him with first-degree criminal mistreatment of a child and theft in the first degree. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The trial is scheduled for February. I've been told by people who follow these things that the financial exploitation charge alone carries up to 10 years in Washington state. I have no comment on what I think the appropriate sentence is. I'll leave that to the court. I spent 32 years making those decisions and I'm officially retired. Claire moved back into the Shoreline house with Eli. She took 2 months off from work, which her firm granted without hesitation. The first morning after she came home, I drove over with groceries and found Eli at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a library book about deep-sea creatures. He looked up when I came in and then went back to his book with the particular satisfaction of a child who is exactly where he is supposed to be. I unloaded the groceries while Claire made coffee. She said, "I keep going over it. Every sign I missed." I said, "You didn't know." "I should have." "I know that feeling," I said. "I've had it about cases where I ruled one way and later found out there was something I didn't see. It doesn't mean you were the cause. It means you were fooled. There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do I make sure I see it next time?" I thought about that. I said, "You already know the answer. When something feels careful, when your child acts careful around someone, when conversations feel managed, you already noticed it. You just overrode what you noticed because you wanted something to be true. That's human. But now you know what to do when that feeling comes back." She nodded. She handed me my coffee. We stood at the window watching Eli eat his cereal and turn a page. 3 weeks ago, Eli started 3rd grade at a new school, closer to my house. Claire drives him in the morning, and I pick him up twice a week, and we go to the library or the hardware store or just drive around and talk about whatever he wants to talk about. He likes geology now. He carries a piece of basalt in his pocket that we found at a park near the lake. He told me it was formed by a volcano, and that volcanoes are actually mostly slow, not the explosive kind. I told him that was true for a lot of things. He looked out the car window and said, "Grandpa, Marcus is going to be in trouble for a long time, right?" I said, "Yes, a very long time." He thought about that. "Good," he said. Then he asked if we could go get donuts. We went and got donuts. I've thought a lot about the morning Terry texted me that photo. I've thought about what would have happened if I hadn't given him the address. What would have happened if I'd believed Marcus's texts and left it alone? What would have happened if I hadn't trusted that feeling I couldn't fully name, the one I got every time I asked about Eli and Claire said fine? 32 years on the family court bench taught me a lot of things. The one that matters most is this: children cannot protect themselves from the adults who control their world. They rely entirely on the adults around them to notice when something is wrong. And noticing is not enough. You have to act on what you notice, even when it's inconvenient, even when it might cause conflict, even when you're a 67-year-old retired judge who was looking forward to a quiet Tuesday. Especially then, Marcus Tolland was counting on me to be polite and patient and assume the best. He was counting on me to be the kind of grandfather who shows up for birthdays and doesn't ask too many questions. He forgot who I was for 32 years. That was his mistake.